Hello, Art Appreciation. I see that there's no one in the class at this moment, so I'm going to start off the class as normal today. And if someone joins in, that's great. We can fill the time and get some response back from another person. Other than that, this will just be a lecture course today. What I'm going to do is leave a moment of thinking time for those watching this video to think before I help with supplying the answer for the following slides. Okay, so our theme for this week is who gives a ruler their power? I'll let you guys think on that for just a second. Who gives a ruler their power? So you might actually learn from your history classes that power does in fact come from the people, and how the ruler would like to be portrayed is often a way to encourage the people to give them said power. And that's where the artists really come in, is that they are essentially providing propaganda for the ruler and their power. I'll let you guys think up about a few questions about this piece before I go into our lecture section. So just a minute or two to think. Okay. Now I do have an exercise for this week on symbolism. So each of these, there's actually a lot more than just 4 symbols in this piece. But I want you to look at these 4 elements real quick and think in your mind of what might the face actually represent. Consider how old the artist is. Then consider the armor plate that the, so look at the age of your subject. Then look at the armor plate. Notice that there's some interesting textural things going on here. This is some low relief design. Then here, there's what looks like a baby reaching up and holding on to the statue. And down here, we actually see the feet, bare feet touching the ground. So these are 4 symbols that we have involved in here. They're going to have to deal with our work today. So we're going to do our tea and discussion right now. I'm going to get the camera set up. Okay, I can see you. You can see me. It looks like it will do. Okay, so we are looking at the statue of Augustus of Prima Porta today, and I'm going to spill the tea on this subject right here. I'm today drinking some coffee just out of a thermos. My cold cloak back on. It's chilly in my house. Okay, so we are looking at the statue of Augustus of Prima Porta. So notice how specific that this, let me adjust the camera. It's really wobbling around. Sorry for the weird, there we go. Thanks for holding together. So the statue of Augustus of Prima Porta, notice how specific that title is. So Augustus is our ruler, and something important to note is that Augustus probably wasn't the name that he was born with. In the old world, once a person got to a new stage of power, they often took on a new name. And you see this actually continue into the popes today, and even the Queen of England. They have that tradition as well. That once you reach a new level of power, you take on a new name, and that brings new meaning to your rulership, which is why there are sometimes many Augustuses in the line. It's not because they all happen to be named that way, it's just because they chose that name. So you're looking here at a statue of Augustus, and notice that he's pointing forward. He has a young face. We're also looking at the symbolism right here of his breastplate, his toga over beneath the left arm. Historically, this is the same age in which they thought left-handed, writing left-handed was, in a way, evil. So your left arm is where we get the word sinister, actually. So your left arm was like your ill-fated arm. So when students were taught the right, that's when you really start to hear about the switch hitting their left hand, so they can only write with their right, because the right was considered divine. And the left had to be covered in some form of fashion. So when you see the ancient Roman toga, they always put it over the left arm. And going down beneath, we see this what looks like a baby tugging on his robes, and at the bottom, his bare feet. So there's lots of symbolism happening in this work. Now, Augustus, when he died, looked nothing like this. He actually lived for a fairly long time, as ancient Roman rulers go. And this is actually a copy of a copy. So during Augustus's life, he had many works made like this. I seem to be leaning over. I'm going to sit this up a little bit. He had many works made like this. And he was a rebel in his time in that he actually wanted to look young. In ancient Rome, they had a technique and style called verism. Verism meant something that looked older than they actually were. It was actually much more common to find an ancient ruler asking a sculptor to put grooves into his face to make him seem even older than he is. Now, Augustus, though, he actually wanted to seem young, believe it or not. I want you guys to think for a second about why would a ruler want to look young? We've already seen from these past images we looked at that there is actually a lot of faith put into wisdom, that many rulers like to look older. But why would this ruler want to look young? We could think on it. In order to direct you into the correct answer, consider what he's wearing right here. He's wearing a military uniform, or high-ranking military uniform, and his breastplate, of course, is not practical. So why would he want to look young in a military uniform? You might be thinking that most of the soldiers at this time were, of course, young, which is true. You aged out pretty early and then were put in a different rank or in a different job in the military if you were no longer young enough to fight anymore. So he's actually trying to encourage his younger citizens to actually go into the military. And on his breastplate, he's actually showing you the exploits that he's taken out with the military. You see him pointing forward right here. He's not only pointing forward, but also pointing up, as you can imagine. And so he's actually pointing to sort of a divine source. And that's actually connected to this little guy down below. Now, who can you think of from Roman mythology that's depicted as a young baby? What comes to most people's mind is, in fact, Cupid, or in the Greek, Eros. So Cupid was the child of who? Aphrodite, right. Okay, so Cupid was a child of Aphrodite. You can't see this from this angle, but if you find a separate angle on the side, Cupid is in fact riding a dolphin right here, which is Aphrodite's symbol. Notice that she came from the sea, and so Cupid is often shown riding the dolphin. So Cupid is in fact in some way linked to Augustus. Can anyone guess why Augustus, this war king, why would he want to show this link to Cupid? It's actually believed in his what he told his constituents as well, and what he tried to show in his family history, that he was the descendant of, in fact, Aphrodite and Cupid. So he was part god. And that's at least what the official record would tell the citizens. Now, is he actually part god? I don't think anyone could possibly prove that. But he even goes to the length, if you look down at the bottom right here, notice that he has no shoes on. And in ancient Roman archetypes and such, they would show that a person without shoes was a god. So only the god would walk barefoot on the soil, basically walking without fear of scratching their feet. Yes. So the statue of Augustus of Prima Porta, the reason why it's called Statue of Augustus of Prima Porta was because Prima Porta is actually a place. It actually means the first port. There are many port sites and many gates throughout the city, or yeah, the first port gate. And so this is actually near a palace of his wife, and it was a gift from his son. Now, one last thing I want to leave you with is that the reason why we study Augustus at all in ancient Roman history is because he did something quite unusual. He led something in his lifetime called the Pax Romani, or the Great Peace of Rome, which is an amazing thing because Rome, by all means, has been founded largely on war. They are a largely warlike society. Much of our own cultural influence in how we deal with international politics and war is actually inspired by Rome. Rome also was the first group to really start the Senate. Notice that senator, it actually means like a gathering of old men. So ancient Rome politics, their structure, there are many ways in which they structured their city, have actually inspired the forefathers of our own country. Something cool to note. Okay, so I'm going to turn off my camera, and I have spilt the tea on the statue of Augustus of Prima Porta. So I'm going to go to the next slide here. Oops. Okay, so in this bit, I ask you to watch a video from Smart History. And looking at this, this is a video, if you look at the link right here. I'll give you a couple minutes to think on it. Maybe even I'll let the recording play too, the volume play. On the Veristic male portrait. And when you open up this link, you'll see a series of like 5 men. If we can hear it here too, I want you to tell me as you're watching this, how is Augustus being a rebel? I mentioned the older portraits before, but I really want you to see them to calculate your opinion.
Before the emperor ruled Rome, Rome was ruled by a republic, by a senate.
A kind of council of elders.
These generally were older men who had come from the elite families in Rome. And so when we think of the people who accorded the most privilege, the most power in the Roman Republic, these were older men, and their age, their experience is what counted.
And so we find during this period of the Republic, especially the period of the late Republic, sculptures, where the sculptor seems to have taken every pains to record a real sense of age and experience.
One example of a Veristic portrait is in the Vatican from the very late Republican period. This is just before Julius Caesar will begin the process of turning the Republic into an empire. We refer to these as Veristic portraits.
That comes from the Latin word veris, for truth. And so there's this idea that they're very truthful, but maybe there's an exaggeration of that sense of experience and wisdom and age.
We see a head of a man that probably came from a much larger sculpture ultimately. We see his head is covered with a toga, which suggests that he was involved in some sort of ritual. Concern is expressed through the eyes. Look at the way that the lips, which are quite thin, are pressed together. There is a solemnity, there is a seriousness, there is a kind of authority that is born of the qualities of the face that we're seeing.
As we look at this shelf with 6 or 8 busts along it, this face stands out. It's really different from the tradition that will develop during the Empire. Augustus becomes the first emperor of Rome and establishes a tradition that looks back to ancient Greece and the tendency that we see there to idealize the human face, the human body. So this kind of Veristic portrait will come to represent later on noble republican ideals. What's interesting is that we see in the later images of emperors that they choose to some degree more or less to idealize themselves, so that if they have themselves portrayed more realistically, they're recalling the virtues of the ancient Roman Republic. If they idealize themselves more, they're recalling an ancient Greek tradition.
So in other words, this was a very conscious set of attributes. It was a very conscious set of symbols that you could draw on more or less.
It was a visual language.
It's so interesting if you think about the way that we represent ourselves now. If you open up a magazine, you have young models that are ideal, that are perfect, and the older not given primary status in our visual culture. But the ancient Romans, at least for a moment, felt differently.
Okay, so hopefully you could hear that video as well, and how verism was used in the ancient world, and then you can tell me on your own how you think Augustus was rebelling against that. It's always interesting when the person in power is also the person being rebellious. This next exercise right here is something for you to upload and find on the computer. This is, in your opinion, what is an image of a strong ruler today? So someone who is ruling a country. It can be a figurehead, it can be, or maybe even someone ruling a city. It doesn't have to be on a large scale. So let me see. I should go look up the mayor of Richmond. I think it's LeVar Stoney. Interesting. The image that they have up here on Google is not the normal one that you see going around. He's a young mayor making some change in the city right here, LeVar Stoney. Most of the other mayors before him have been much older. Let me get smaller in case you want to put more on your board. But LeVar has, they actually are smiling, and actually you can tell that they are trying to show the creases and wrinkles as well, in many ways trying to mature him. And that's not uncommon with younger presidents and younger rulers as well, is that we actually try to show those age lines, especially for someone young. You even see this with models as well, or child actors will use makeup to make themselves look older too. But notice that in today's photography world, actually softening out any creases or edges is really easy for the artist to do. So when it doesn't happen, that normally says something right there, choosing to show those age lines. Okay, so I want you from that to start thinking again about bias, of who has the more authority. And I'll do a little talk on this, and no one is here to help me with it, called the Crone versus the sage. Now this is something that has been an argument in history as well as in literature. It's how we depict our elderly people as to who has more power. And this is, you can actually really see this in the Tales of King Arthur as people get older. So you can think about your own family structure of who is at the head of the family, who has the most authority. Is it a grandmother figure or a grandfather figure? And just to be aware of when people are making an opinion on who is wiser with age. So the crone, over to the left, is technically the age of or how you would describe an old woman. So today the word crone is actually a distasteful name, versus the sage, which is the word that we use to describe an old man. And today, once again, that's actually a more positive word. You might hear sage on the stage is when a teacher is making a lecture from a lectern. And I want you to think on your own, is there bias? Do you think? We hear in our words that there's bias. Crone doesn't sound as nice as sage. And you can think in your own family structures, like, is there a bias of authority? Now, at least in my family, there tends to be a natural matriarchy, just because for whatever reason, the great-grandfather didn't live as long as my great-grandmother, or wasn't as lucid or aware before, like, senility hits. But it could be opposite for you. Maybe you have maybe you actually have a patriarch in your family, so an oldest relative who is asked to make decisions. And you can think on that. Going here, how can we describe the style or process of the above work? I'll go back to this image for us to see real quick again. So the style or process. So notice the Roman process is very much like the Greeks, except they're a little bit more practical. In ancient Rome, they will happily make hands too large or feet too large just so that it'll fit and be more structurally sound. Romans are also a little bit more awkward, right? This is not as graceful as the Nike of Samothrace. They've been slapping on other sculptures into the sculpture. And they even, just because they have run out of space, are like packing in symbolism into the chest as well. So also Romans, if you look up here, this is a classic Roman haircut. You normally don't see it in ancient Greece. And this haircut even survives to the day, particularly with men with short bangs. But women would also have hairstyles that would shorten their forehead. Romans liked short foreheads. That's going to make a big deal later on in the Renaissance, where the Renaissance loved big foreheads. So if you know someone with short bangs today, or who can braid their hair across their face, or maybe they have like a really small forehead, they would have been considered very attractive in ancient Rome. But in the later Renaissance period, people thought that was ugly. But even today, we still have the same haircut. I think my husband even has these bangs right here. That's a good giveaway. Okay. So the style and process. We can think that the style is a little bit more practical, kind of clunkier. They have a lot more heavy symbolism, and then the short bangs. The process is very similar to the Nike of Samothrace. They are, in fact, carving again. This piece is carved. However, there are several other bronze casts, so bronze statues made of the same thing. Compare and contrast, right? Well, we just hit a comparison right there. It's how they're made. They're both marble statues. They're chiseled. It's a contrast here. One is Roman, one is Greek. One is the goddess of victory, but we don't know who her mortal subject was inspired by. And this is, in fact, we can even call him who's considered a demigod ruler. And she was fighting, or she was sacrificed to for war. He actually was known for peace, even though he has the sort of triumph of war right here. Several comparison contrasts, and you can even be obvious right here too, so that he's a male figure, she's definitely a female figure. Remember, you can be really obvious in art history. Okay, how does this affect the art world? Just to keep note that if something has survived this long, know that all other cultures who lived in the same area have probably seen the piece too. And it definitely did inspire later works, and especially these works actually inspired the Renaissance as well. Michelangelo, Leonardo, they all look to works like this. How did this impact you? Well, hopefully you can tell me that. Okay, so thank you for tuning in. If you've been watching to keep up with the lesson, sorry for the slight awkwardness in format, as this lesson is always stronger if there's another person involved. If you have any questions, please email me. And I hope you guys have a wonderful week. Remember that this class will be meeting next week, but Wednesday and Friday classes will not be because of the holiday. I hope you guys have a great day.